Hey guys, today we're diving into a question that's been floating around like a Roman mosaic. Did the ancient Romans really have a thing for blondes? Because honestly, if Hollywood has taught us anything, it's that Romans were all about power, togas, and apparently blonde hair. Well, buckle up, because the truth is way messier, a lot more surprising, and maybe even a little darker than you'd expect. Grab a drink, get comfy, preferably not in a toga, and let's unravel the story of Roman hair obsession. Spoiler, it's not exactly what you see in every ancient statue. Before we jump in, hit like if you're curious about how much beauty standards can shift over thousands of years, and drop a comment on whether you think blondes are still winning in the aesthetic race today. Now dim the lights, unless you're in a toga, and let's get into it. In the quiet corners of Rome's bustling forum, Lucius observed a woman with strikingly light hair, her golden locks shimmering softly even beneath the shady awning of a merchant's stall. She moved with a calm certainty, offering small bundles of cloth and bronze trinkets to passers-by who barely glanced up. At first, he thought her hair was a simple, natural brightness, but as he watched, he sensed a kind of curiosity flickering among the other elite men nearby, an unspoken question about this unfamiliar look from Gaul. The air was filled with the faint scent of olives, dust, and old stone, and the distant murmur of trade persisted like an ongoing, mild background hum. It was all very ordinary, yet within this quiet moment, the idea of hair shining like sunlight seemed almost symbolic of something distant, a fleeting beauty perhaps, easily admired, but never truly understood. Days passed, and Lucius found himself occasionally watching Aelia from a respectful distance, pondering whether her blonde hair was a mere accident of ancestry or something more significant to her identity. Rumors drifted through the market stalls as well. Some claimed that such hair was a mark of nobility. Others whispered it was simply a matter of exposure to northern winds and colder climes. As the gossip grew, so did the tension in Lucius's thoughts. Was there an unspoken status associated with her color? Or was it merely the way she looked into the sunlight that made her seem somehow different from the other women? The question felt small but persistent, like a pebble in a shoe, inescapable and oddly grounding. The crowd around the forum seemed unaware of this quiet debate, going about daily routines with the steady, measured pace of annoyingly normal life. Aelia, meanwhile, remained serene, her hair catching the light in a way that seemed deliberately calm, almost waiting for acknowledgement that might never come. Some of the men chuckled quietly about their fascination, casting amused glances toward Lucius, who hesitated at the edge of his own curiosity. It was an irony, really, how something so superficial, the hue of her hair, had become a source of silent interest and barely concealed speculation. No sacred sign or divine message appeared, no prophetic figure's face blurred with obscurity to clarify the matter. Instead, it was simply her presence, a human detail that stirred this minor collective wonder. The moment felt suspended, like a slow, warm breeze stirring fallen leaves, neither urgent nor insistent, just softly stirring the air of the forum. Eventually, Lucius found himself in a quiet conversation with a fellow merchant, the edges of debate softened by the commonality of daily existence. They discussed how beauty often resided in the simplest traits, an eyebrow's arch, a gesture, or a shade of hair, and how society's values could shift like shadows cast by a setting sun. For all the talk of colors and origins, there was a shared recognition that these features, no matter how notable, often dissolved into the background of life's ordinary routines. The bright hair was there, and then it was only a part of the scene, neither superior nor inferior, just another detail that made their world slightly more colorful, yet fundamentally unchanged. The golden hue remained an unspoken symbol, quietly observed and quietly forgotten. In the stillness that followed, Lucius reflected on how fleeting their perceptions truly were, how the fascination with her hair might fade as quickly as it had arisen, leaving behind only the gentle memory of sunlight caught in simple human features. Perhaps the ancient Romans, with all their grandeur and power, simply appreciated beauty in small, everyday things, knowing well that all such admiration was transient, like the quiet dusk settling over the marble pillars. Aelia, with her calm, unassuming presence, seemed to embody that understanding, neither seeking nor shunning attention, existing as quietly as the shadows lengthening across the forum. And so, life continued in its slow, steady rhythm, leaving behind the faint traces of light on blonde hair, and the faint irony of how such superficial hues can hold a universe of quiet human stories. In the quiet hours of reconstruction and empire building, Lucius found himself wandering through the marketplace, observing the varied hues of hair that caught the waning sunlight dark, black, and surprisingly, a few lighter strands that shimmered like threads of gold. It was during these slow, contemplative walks that rumors about blondness as a rare, even exotic trait started to whisper through the crowd, carried with a half smile from shopkeepers and tavern talkers. Curious about these gossip murmurs, Lucius sought ancient texts, flipping through scrolls that smelled faintly of straw and ink, trying to find some pattern or story that connected beauty to hair color. The texts offered conflicting images, Some praised bright hair as a sign of divine favor. Others dismissed it as superficial vanity. Yet, what remained clear was that these whispers of blondness prickled just beneath the surface of Roman social life, hinting at an invisible fascination that seemed both trivial and strangely persistent. As Lucius delved deeper, a hint of tension crept into his quiet search, a subtle tug of doubt as he encountered soldiers and philosophers who expressed their opinions with measured tones. A centurion, his face weathered like worn leather, scoffed at the idea that hair could symbolize anything beyond personal grooming, while a stoic philosopher shrugged, suggesting that such superficial trivia hardly mattered in the grand order of things. Still, the arguments layered like sediment, hinting that cultural value often attached itself not solely to noble deeds, but to outward appearances that hinted at status or exotic origins. The more Lucius listened, the more he sensed that these notions carried a secret irony, that the admiration for blondness was less about actual beauty and more about the human craving for the rare and unattainable. The silent, slow rhythm of this debate mimicked the quiet flow of a distant, sad river, both human and timeless. Surprisingly, when Lucius turned to the matrony, those wise women who kept the household stories, their opinions danced with a gentle humor, veiled behind knowing smiles. They often shared tales about foreign slaves or visitors with blonde hair, making light jokes about how everyone seemed to agree that golden locks signified some hidden, almost mystical allure, despite the plain reality of everyday life. A matrona, her hands busy weaving, chuckled softly and mused that perhaps reddish or blonde hair was a sort of superficial disguise, a trick of the sun or dirt rather than true nobility. The irony emerged quietly. What people associated with beauty was often nothing more than a fleeting reflection of sunlight, things that washed away with soap or the passage of time. As Lucius listened, he found himself smiling in gentle acknowledgement of human absurdity, our predilection for surface stories amid the stillness of ordinary life. Eventually, Lucius reached a calm acceptance that what humans consider beauty, especially fleeting notions like hair color, is nothing more than a fragile ornament within the endless passage of time. Standing alone in the quiet of an evening, after hours of wandering through markets and scrolls, he noticed how the shadows lengthened, turning everything into muted shades of brown and cream. The world seemed unchanged by the debates over blondness, by the whispers, opinions, or stories, remaining silent in the deepening dusk. Perhaps, he pondered, this was the true lesson of human vanity, that no matter how much we may seek significance in superficial traits, the enduring silence of time remains indifferent. In this stillness, his thoughts settled, recognizing that beauty, like history, glides past quietly, often unnoticed, and perhaps unneeded to understand the human story. In the gentle quiet of reflection, Lucius understood that the fascination with blonde hair was just another ripple in the calm sea of human idiosyncrasy, a fleeting signal of hope, wishful thinking, or the distant allure of the unknown. The stories of ancient texts and everyday conversations had woven a subtle pattern of human longing to stand out, to be seen as exotic or divine, even if only in small details. And as he looked out at the calm horizon, a soft smile hovered unspoken, knowing that this quiet obsession was both trivial and deeply human. Just the slow, unimportant melodies that compose the greater symphony of life. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, and he felt the gentle weight of history's unhurried, bemused presence, forever wrapped in the unremarkable, yet quietly significant moments of human existence. During the quiet days of the grand festival of Venus, a sense of anticipation hovered over the marble courtyards and shaded porticos. Women with hair carefully styled and shimmering, golden tresses waited alongside those dressed in darker shades, all hoping to be crowned the most radiant, their hopes flickering softly like candle flames in the evening air. Among them, Aelia, a young woman from a distant province, held her head high, her hair soft and blonde as sunlight through a thin veil of clouds. The murmurs of officials preparing the contest sounded like distant waves, slow and steady, a ritual of beauty rooted deeply in tradition. It was an occasion meant to unify praise for Venus and to elevate the beauty standards that continued to evolve quietly through generations. As the festival unfolded, whispers of political tension crept in alongside the scented oils and flower garlands. A senator, whose gaze seemed forever fixed on the procession, began murmuring about foreign influences and the danger they posed, particularly the foreign hairstyles that made some Roman maidens appear almost otherworldly. Rumors spread that he aimed to suppress the more exotic styles, favoring a return to authentic Roman looks. Meanwhile, Aelia's proud, unstyled blonde hair became the subject of sly comments and cautious glances. Her beauty a silent challenge to the growing unrest. The air grew subtly charged with unspoken rules and veiled disapproval, weaving a delicate web of intrigue around the celebration. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone here. Amid the soft hum of ceremony, the very idea of beauty was being politicized and debated in hushed tones. Aelia standing quietly beside other contestants, smiled faintly at her reflection in a basin of water, her hair shining with a gentle, almost innocent light. There was a peculiar humor in the way the contest, meant for admiration, became a battleground of politics and identity. The judges, faces mostly blurred in the bright afternoon light, remained inscrutable, choosing the radiant look with slow deliberation. It seemed that the true contest was less about beauty and more about who could navigate the silent, unspoken rules without breaking the gentle surface of tradition. Eventually, the festival settled into a calm rhythm, as if the tension had been quietly absorbed into the backdrop of soft music and lingering scents. Alia's hair, still gleaming softly, was declared a shining example of natural radiance, a quiet triumph amid the subtle political turbulence. The senator's objections faded into the outskirts of conversation, replaced by applause and the gentle rustling of robes. For a moment, time seemed to slow as the festival melted into an ordinary evening, people chatting, children laughing, and the sun dipping just low enough to cast a warm, orange glow over everything. The story of the blonde girl from beyond the city walls gradually became part of the long, slow narrative of familiarity and human imperfection. In the stillness of the night, a slow sense of reflection settled over the festival site. Beneath the softly falling shadows, the story of beauty, identity, and politics continued to drift through the quiet air, more like a whisper than a shout. History, much like the fading light, seemed tired but bemused, knowing that what was celebrated today could quietly change tomorrow. Alia, now resting among friends, traced the pattern of her hair absent-mindedly, aware that her radiance had touched none of the grander ambitions around her. Perhaps that was enough. In these simple, everyday moments, humanity whispered its truths. It is not the hair alone that makes us shine, but the quiet resilience to remain ourselves, gently, under the watchful eyes of history. In the slow, diffuse mornings of ancient Rome's public life, the idea of beauty was a quiet whisper between marble columns and the softly shuffling footsteps of senators. Among them, whispers circulated about Alia, a woman with a braid that shimmered like sunlight caught in a thread of gold, a rare sight that stirred neither disdain nor fervor, but just a faint curiosity. When her braid was presented in a modest contest, it was merely a matter of tradition. Beauty was usually judged by age, status, or familiarity, not by the subtle gleam of hair. Still, Alia's luminous strands caught the eye of those who lingered longer than necessary, their faces blurred behind the haze of their own aged expectations. The day was slow, the air thick with the scent of olives and old stone as the community watched, half expecting nothing more than routine news swaps to proceed once again. As the contest progressed and the luminous braid was unveiled, an unexpected tension flickered through the air. The senators, seated in their stone seats, exchanged glances and murmured, uncertain of the shifting undercurrent, an admiration that felt unfamiliar, almost indecent. Heated whispers arose, questioning whether the beauty of gold-touched hair deserved recognition, alongside ancient virtues of strength and wisdom. A few voices, muffled yet insistent, suggested that perhaps this was a sign of changing times, an acknowledgement that beauty, even in such a humble form, could stir public admiration beyond old prejudices. The atmosphere grew charged. A slow scrape of stone against stone, the only sound, as the idea of a new kind of beauty challenged the quiet certainty of tradition, forcing Lucius, the senator overseeing the event, into a silent pause. There was an irony in the scene, as the very object that had been overlooked or dismissed, a simple braid, decorated with sunlight, became the focus of unrest. Its beauty a slow, almost humorous barrier to ingrained dogma. The room subtly shifted, some mocking the fuss while others looked away, perhaps embarrassed at their own fixation. Lucius rubbed his face, the lines of age etched deep and tired, as if the weight of centuries of ideals pressed down on him. A communal breath, slow and unremarkable, passed through the hall, each person quietly aware of how absurd it was to live in a society so focused on superficial judgments. The light from the sunset outside softened the marble, casting long shadows that seemed to mock the heated debate within. Calm settled as the tension dissipated, a gentle acknowledgement that what mattered was neither the contest nor the opinion of the fleeting crowd, but the unspoken moment of change itself. The senators, their faces softer now, recognized quietly that beauty, like history, was a slow, shifting tide, not easily contained within the rigid lines of tradition. Alia's braid, resting quietly on the marble table, became a symbol not of superficiality, but of a quieter acceptance. Lucius, gazing at the sunlight playing on her hair, realized that even in a civilization so often bound by laws and rituals, the simple act of admiration carried its own understated courage. It was this subtle shift, like the fading warmth of day, that made the whole scene less a debate and more an unspoken acknowledgement of human imperfection and modest progress. Later, in the stillness that followed, the story of Alia's luminous braid settled quietly into the background of old Rome's endless stream of rituals. The city, with its whispering ruins and distant echoes of chariot wheels, seemed to consider the fleeting nature of beauty and prejudice. both facades that blurred and faded with time. Perhaps it was enough that a single braid had managed to stir a moment of reflection among the learned, and the powerful, a tiny, slow ripple in the vast river of history. The faces, blurred by light and shadow, remained quietly indifferent, yet somehow more human for it. In the calm aftermath, one might imagine the faint smile of one who finally accepted that the slow victory was in simply seeing beauty for what it was: fragile, fleeting, and quietly worthy of note. In the gentle hush of early Roman mornings, the city awoke amid a tableau of familiar routines: slaves sweeping stone courtyards, merchants arranging simple wares, and citizens pausing to greet the dawn. Among them, there lingered a quiet fascination, almost a faint whisper outside daily life, with the idea of blondness. It was a subtle curiosity, woven into stories and fleeting glances, but rarely did it seem a matter of import. Still, for some, the golden tresses of distant lands carried a certain allure, a gentle question about beauty and difference drifting through the streets like a soft breeze. Nothing urgent, just an echo of a possibility lingering in the background of ordinary days. As decades unfurled, the quiet curiosity began to acquire a faint tension, as patterns of admiration slowly emerged among artisans and poets. Scarce yet deliberate, depictions in mosaics and frescoes started to hint at the allure of golden hair, those luminescent strokes of civilization's aesthetic suspicion. Tales whispered of foreign visitors, their eyes lingering on the scrolls and statues, their voices muffled and uncertain behind veiled faces. In the shadowed corners of markets and villas, some aristocrats found themselves amused by the novelty, subtly aligning their fancy with this rare, luminous trait, but always with the knowing smirk that beneath their admiration, it was still just a fleeting fashion, an idea slipping through the cracks of their ancient culture. By now, the irony of the situation was almost palpable. Poets, ever eager to capture fleeting time, began composing verses praising the charms of blonde hair, turning it into a symbol of light, purity, and exotic elegance. Yet they seldom truly knew what to do with that brightness beyond metaphor. Some mosaics showed Alia with shining hair, her features softly blurred by the intervening light, her legacy subtly intertwined with this fascination. The Romans, masters of practicality, still maintained their usual calm, choosing to observe this passing trend with a mixture of mild humor and quiet indifference. They appreciated the beauty, but it remained, at best, a fleeting ornament in the larger mosaic of their everyday life. In the slow, measured days that followed, the fascination settled into a kind of peaceful acceptance. Blondness, once a peculiar enigma, became another thread woven into the vast tapestry of Roman notions of beauty and style. Streets continued their steady rhythm. Mosaics persisted in mirroring a subtle shift, a hint of shifting tastes beneath the surface of everyday life. The faces of prophets and scholars, blurred and hidden by shadows or distant light, carried no judgment, only a quiet observation, as if recognizing that human preferences, like the passing seasons, are largely unpredictable and often silent in their movement. In that calmness, there was a certain melancholy acknowledgement of fleeting trends that never quite define the soul. Looking back from this calm distance, it is possible to see how the Romans' slow embrace of blondness left a faint, yet lingering mark, a quiet nod to the diverse tapestry of human beauty and desire. Alia's mosaic, with its shimmering gold hints, endures as a gentle reminder of how fleeting fascinations can become enduring symbols in culture. It's a story told softly, an echo of human imperfection and curiosity, enshrined in stone and memory, yet always somewhat distant, like a whisper of sunlight on old marble. In the end, the fascination with blonde hair was merely another small, human ripple in the vast, slow-moving tide of history, always present, quietly changing, and never quite complete. In the quiet hum of the Roman morning, Lucius Varro, a young patrician with a restless gaze, wandered near the bustling forum, where merchants called softly to passers-by. Among the crowded stalls, a foreign merchant with weathered hands displayed small jars filled with strange powders, promising a hue that only gods and distant foreigners once bore, blonde hair kissed by the sun. The idea flickered in Lucius's mind as he touched the cool glass, contemplating the promise of transformation amidst the ordinary clatter of daily life. A faint smile played on his lips, caught between curiosity and the unspoken weight of tradition, as the bustling city around him seemed to slow in anticipation of something new. The world, vast yet familiar, quietly listened in the background, unknowing that this small act might ripple into a subtle shift in how beauty was perceived. As days passed, Lucius found himself increasingly drawn to the strange allure of the dye, imagining the bright, foreign hair that was seldom seen among his peers. A sense of tension crept into his quiet mornings. He wondered if the others would notice, if their steady eyes would judge or dismiss. One evening, he sat alone in his villa, the jar of powder resting nearby, the soft glow of oil lamps casting long shadows across the stone walls. The realization that he was venturing beyond accepted norms, the silent expectations of patrician decorum, brought a gentle, ironic hum to his thoughts. It was a small rebellion, perhaps foolish, yet oddly freeing in the stillness of the evening. The world outside continued its slow turn, indifferent to his inner questioning about identity and adornment. Eventually, word of the strange die spread quietly, whispered in hushed tones among the city's edge or the less refined corners of markets. Some laughed softly, others regarded with mild curiosity. No overt condemnation arose, only shared bemusement at the absurdity of it all. Lucius, now contemplating the ritual of applying the powder, noticed how the simple act of changing hair color could twist into a subtle irony, how a hue once linked to gods or foreign elites could drift into everyday life, muted and mundane. As he sat watching himself in a small mirror, the blonde tones shimmered slightly under the flickering light, not quite as radiant as in the merchant's promises, yet strangely mundane. The novelty wove into the fabric of ordinary Rome, a quiet comedy of human pretensions, unfolding without fuss or urgency. In time, the initial fascination faded into a calm acceptance, as Lucius returned to the familiar routines of patrician leisure and civic duty. The blonde hair, now part of his reflection, seemed to settle into its quiet place amid the dark, wavy locks that had defined him before. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that perhaps identity was less about the colors we wore and more about how quietly we carried ourselves amidst the routines of life. The city outside moved slowly onward. Market sounds softened. The distant rhythmic clatter of chariots faded into a hum of distant memory. Lucius found comfort in the subtlety of change, in realizing that some shifts, however minor, could quietly reshape perception without grand gestures. It was a small chapter in the long, slow story of human vanity and acceptance, unfolding like a gentle wave beneath the heavy sky of history. Looking back, this moment of curious experimentation feels like a faint ripple in the vast sea of human endeavors, an instance of quiet defiance blending into ordinary life. The strange, foreign dye became an unremarkable part of Rome's tapestry, a whisper of change that both amused and amusedly surprised those who noticed. For Lucius, it was perhaps a lesson in the gentle absurdity of human aspiration, how the pursuit of beauty, transient and often trivial, quietly shapes identities across the ages. The city, with all its old stones and slow-moving chariots, kept its calm rhythm, indifferent to the small revolutions within. And as the light waned over the forum, so too did the subtle story of the blonde patrician settle into the quiet archive of history's mundane, meaningful moments. In the gentle hush of a Roman morning, Lucius sat quietly beside a shallow bowl, delicately swirling a mixture of plant extracts and herbs into a paste, a cautious experiment with dye. His jaw was set in mild concentration, eyes wandering over the passing shadows cast by the olive trees beyond. The idea of changing his appearance, perhaps to catch someone's eye, or simply to amuse himself, felt oddly comforting in its quiet simplicity. As the first hint of golden hue appeared on the cloth he dabbed, he hardly noticed the subtle flicker of approval from a passing servant, nor the distant murmur of courtiers who debated the latest fashions with half-closed eyes. It was just another small human gesture, an attempt to carve a new little identity in the shifting sands of imperial life. Soon enough, Lucius's ambition brought him into the court's curious gaze. His blonding experiment stirred whispers, some of admiration, others of concern. Senators, with their hands resting lazily on their scrolls, debated whether this pale hue indicated wealth and sophistication or vulgarity and moral decline. The gossip was not loud, but it lingered like a stale scent in the marble hallways, twisting through the conversation in half-heard sentences and raised eyebrows. Aurelia, his sister, and a Vestal priestess, watched quietly from the sidelines, her clever mind noting the subtle shifts in power. She understood that in Rome, even a change in hair color could ripple into questions of morality, allegiance, and social standing, an irony not lost in her calm, thoughtful gaze. The irony was slow and inescapable. Here was a society so obsessed with appearance that even a simple dye became a matter of scandal or celebration. Lucius's hair, tinged to faint gold, was glimpsed in fleeting reflections, sometimes admired, sometimes mocked. The senators' debates grew quieter, their echoes blending with the distant clang of armor and the murmured prayers of priests whose faces remained unseen, blurred beneath veils of light. Aurelia observed, amused, how easily the superficial could hide the deeper truths, how a modest change could mask or reveal ambitions, fears, and fakery. In this hazy theater of human vanity, everyone played their part, silently tethered to the absurdity of looking or appearing just a little different. Eventually, the buzz softened into a calm acceptance, like the slow settling of dust after a breeze. Though the questions about blondness persisted beneath polite smiles, Lucius, now slightly more confident, allowed himself a faint smile in the mirror, touching the cool folds of his linen tunic before stepping into the bustling streets. Aurelia, standing nearby, reflected on how these trivial accessories, threads, dyes, and hairstyles, often masked more serious pursuits of power and influence. The courts still whispered, but time pressed forward quietly, indifferent to the color of a single man's hair. In these small, silent moves, the slow passage of history continued, marked not by grand moments, but by countless understated human choices. Beneath the quiet veneer of Roman life, the episode of Lucius and his blonde experiment became one more quiet story, a gentle reminder of the human tendency to seek change in the smallest of ways, sometimes for admiration, sometimes for defiance, and often just because the light struck a little differently that day. History, tired and calm, kept moving slowly, inevitably, as people fussed over their appearance in flesh and hair, in power and humility. Aurelia, perhaps, would reflect on it later, in her own way, her face hidden in shadow, her mind quietly noting the odd, persistent dance of human pretensions. And somewhere in the background, a prophet's blurred face watched from unseen shadows, uncertain whether the world was truly changing or merely replaying itself in another muted, sleepy day. In the quiet corridors of Emperor Hadrian's palace, the idea of hair color had begun to drift into the realm of fashion. A subtle yet persistent curiosity that flickered through the courtiers' conversations. Lucius and Aurelia, known for their skillful hands and attentive eyes, were summoned one warm morning, their footsteps echoing softly on cool marble as they approached the imperial chambers. The emperor, seated beneath a canopy of woven fabric, listened with a distant gaze, his interest piqued by the notion that hair could tell stories beyond mere appearance. The air was tinged with the faint scent of olives and wax, a commonplace symphony of daily life that felt suddenly more weighted. Slowly, in that muted space, a quiet hope germinated. Perhaps beauty was more than just luck or status, but something crafted by human hands, even within the imperial walls. As days folded into weeks, the tension subtly grew. Rival factions watched from shadows, their whispers weaving into the fabric of court politics. Rumors circulated about a secret formula, one tied to distant lands and lost trade routes, promising a shade of blonde that could rival the sun itself. Lucius and Aurelia, caught between loyalty and cunning, pored over maps and rare ingredients, their fingers tracing routes across the empire's far-flung corners. Yet the more they uncovered, the more the story shimmered with irony. An empire famously proud of its simplicity, now chasing the elusive art of hair perfection. Meanwhile, behind the velvet curtains, other hands considered weaponizing such beauty, plotting to twist it into a political tool. The empire, it seemed, was as much a battlefield for appearances as it was for power. One late afternoon, the air thickened with the scent of herbs and oil as the imperial stylists finally revealed their secret, a luminous, earthy paste derived from rare plants and minerals, harvested along the remote trade routes. The formula was a quiet marvel of human curiosity and trade, a blend created with delicate patience and practical ignorance. The emperor's entourage watched in muted fascination as Lucius carefully applied the mixture to Aurelia's golden hair, the color slowly transforming in the gentle glow of oil lamps. Irony tingled quietly in the air. What seemed like a simple beauty trick was, in fact, a story stitched together by distant lands and human longing. The palace, momentarily still, felt like the quiet before a wave, the subtle hum of anticipation echoing in every breath. All was calm, yet beneath the surface, quiet plots persisted, blending daydreams with quiet ambition. During a rare moment of stillness, the palace settled into its usual rhythm. But the matter of the blonde formula lingered beneath the surface like a soft, distant thunder. Lucius and Aurelia reflected in the cool quiet of their workshop, each aware that their craft had become more than mere vanity. It was a small act of defiance against the slow, inevitable march of empire politics. The secret formula, now known in hushed whispers, was both a gift and a burden capable of elevating status or tearing loyalties apart. Patrons and servants alike glanced at themselves in polished mirrors, their expressions gentle and unremarkable, an echo of the empire's unassuming mood. The world outside moved sluggishly, and perhaps that was enough to exist quietly in the midst of a vast, indifferent history, contemplating the fragile, fleeting nature of human beauty and power. In the end, history often moved at its own languid pace, and the story of the blonde hair formula faded into antique whispers and faint smiles in the dust of the palace corridors. Lucius and Aurelia returned to their simple routines, their secret locked away like many human stories, beautiful, mundane, and quietly absurd. The empire continued, its great temples and marble columns standing silent, as if contemplating how a small trick of the trade could ripple outward in time, unnoticed yet significant. As the light outside waned into the gentle dusk, the idea of beauty remained a quiet human endeavor, an echo of longing, a symbol of fleeting status, softly woven into the broader tapestry of empire life. Somewhere in the distance, a prophet's unseen face blurred in shadow, offering no answers, only the gentle reminder that some stories are better left sleepy and unexamined. In the soft glow of early afternoon, the grand spectacle of the Ludi Romani unfolded across the marble courtyards and bustling streets, while a quiet sense of tradition settled over the city's heart. Among the many fashions that caught the eye, the striking blonde hair of certain citizens stood out, shimmering gently under the sun's warm touch, an emblem of status and modern flair. Lucius, a modest merchant's son, watched from a shaded corner, his family's simple but proud tradition of blonde styling, seeming almost like a secret gesture in the sea of dark-haired Romans. The air smelled faintly of bread, olives, and the distant echo of laughter, all slipping quietly into the routine hum of life. In these moments, the parade of human distinction flowingly blended with the mundane rhythm of everyday existence, unnoticed by most, but quietly significant for some. As the festival reached its crest, a sudden hush fell over the gathering. A distant blaze licked the edges of the Senate House, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. Rumors trickled through the crowd, suggestions and accusations mingling with the smoke on the breeze. Blonde conspirators, some whispered. Lucius felt his pulse slow, a strange irony quietly settling within. The very appearance that marked him as fashionable and proud now seethed beneath suspicion. The grand parade of festivities seemed to waver, fragile as a pulled thread. Each eye turned toward the encroaching flames and the shadows they cast. Tension, soft and unspoken, seeped into the cobblestones, hinting at a story that had yet to unfold, yet already changed everything. Days later, the city's calm betrayed a subtle irony. Those accused of causing the fire were, of course, the very people who bore the most noticeable trait. Their blonde hair, displayed proudly as a mark of fashion and nobility. Lucius found himself caught between the rumor mill and an impending trial, the weight of societal expectations pressing down with quiet persistence. His family's honor, once a gentle pride, now trembled as accusations swirled around their simple, yet visible choice of hair. The courtroom was a space of slow, measured silence, where faces blurred behind veils of shadow, and the faint glow of oil lamps, obscuring truth and motive alike. Watching from the sidelines, Lucius recognized the subtlety of human folly, how quickly aesthetic choices could become symbols of suspicion and shame. Over time, the storm of accusations settled into a distant hum, and the city's heartbeat slowly resumed its usual flow. Like a river finding its course after temporary disruption, Lucius, sitting quietly in a shaded portico, reflected on the absurdity of it all, the fragile link between outward appearance and inner worth. The day's proceedings faded into memory, replaced by a gentle acknowledgement that human pride often threads itself through the simplest choices, like hair color. The festival's aftermath left behind only a quiet sense of patience, a reminder that truth, much like the quiet dawn after a long night, unfolds at its own leisurely pace. People resumed their daily routines, the blonde styles reappearing with a soft confidence, as if to say the world, in its dull, patient way, kept turning. In the slow, unhurried moments of reflection, It became clear that the story of the blonde fashion in imperial Rome was, after all, a mirror to human nature, constantly shifting, quietly absurd, yet enduring beneath layers of irony. Lucius often found himself watching others, observing how small battles over appearance could mirror larger ones of honor and identity. Perhaps, he considered, there was comfort in these small insignificances, reminders that human lives drifted in a slow, sometimes humorous current, marked by choices both foolish and wise. As the city rested into its peaceful rhythm, a gentle understanding softly settled. History, like a tired witness, simply watches and waits, patiently amused by human stories, both profound and trivial. The Festival of Light lingered in memory, not as a grand event, but as a quiet chapter, slow, ordinary, and quietly human. In the gentle half-light of early morning, the Romans went about their routines, some inspecting freshly dyed threads, others passing by the market stalls, where blonde hair was still a social choice, admired or quietly ignored. There was a subtle anticipation in the air, as if an unspoken trend was quietly settling into place within the familiar rhythm of daily life. Lucius and Aurelia, sitting side by side over a small dish of bread and olives, exchanged knowing glances about the latest fashion whispering through the city's streets. Their faces, calm and slightly amused, reflected a society that observed its own customs with detached patience, yet felt the faint flicker of change just beyond the horizon. It was the kind of morning where history was quietly turning its pages, unnoticed but inevitable. Later, beneath the public scrutiny of a grand tribunal, the tension grew like a slow-burning ember. The trial unfolded with measured words and tired gestures. Voices echoed softly against marble walls steeped in centuries of tradition. The question of hair, blonde or not, became unexpectedly significant, revealing the fragile social distinctions beneath the surface. The emperor, eyes shadowed behind a heavy screen of light, finally decreed that blonde hair was to be a symbol of imperial unity, a gesture both practical and oddly poetic. As a ripple of murmurs passed through the audience, Lucius and Aurelia exchanged subtle smiles, recognizing the irony woven into a decree that made everyone look the same, yet rooted them further into the fabric of empire. The moment was quiet, yet oddly definitive, like the settling of dust over a long-standing truth. In the days that followed, the city's shops displayed all manner of blonding tools, wigs, dyes, and powders, suddenly common, yet strangely mundane in their appeal. A few bold citizens experimented with new shades, their expressions relaxed, yet mildly amused by their own attempts. Lucius and Aurelia, now celebrated for their role in fostering cultural exchange, strolled through the bustling forums, their light-hearted conversations floating over the hum of daily life. The humor of it all was undeniable, until the novelty of sameness gradually dissolved into a quiet acceptance, like a well-worn toga that no longer seemed remarkable, but still carried stories. People nodded at each other with a sense of shared understanding, acknowledging the irony that unity sometimes meant uniformity, or at least the appearance of it. As the seasons shifted and the city settled into a slow, warm routine, there was a calming sense of normalcy, a gentle acknowledgement that fashion and social symbols were fleeting. Yet the stories lingered like a soft echo. Lucius sat outside, shading his eyes from the low sun, watching children with flaxen hair chase each other across the forum. Somebody nearby was humming an old tune, their voice blending into the ambient hum of a city unhurried. Orlia, seated in a quiet corner, reflected on how the fashion had become part of the city's fabric, intertwined with everyday gestures and silent nods of approval. In this unhurried moment, history felt universal and still, an ongoing story of human imperfection, written in the slow threads of daily life. Looking back, the story of blonde fashion in Rome seemed to whisper softly through the centuries, an insignificant detail that carried a quiet emblem of unity, or perhaps a reminder of human tendency to find meaning in small things. Lucius and Orlia's roles as patrons of cultural exchange had gently sealed this chapter into the memory of a society both proud and amused by its own eccentricities. Their quiet participation, marked by modest smiles and shared glances, underscored the notion that even in moments of absurd fashion, there was a human truth beneath, a desire for belonging, expressed in the unremarkable act of changing a strand of hair. And so, the city continued on, woven with threads of subtle irony and calm reflection, drifting into another day of unspoken stories. In the quiet early hours of a Roman morning, Lucius, a young poet with a mind full of traditional ideals, wandered through the bustling forum. His eyes occasionally lingered on the familiar sights, vendors packing up their stalls, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. But it was Orlia, a courtesan with golden hair that seemed to catch the low sunlight, who drew his quiet fascination. She moved with deliberate grace, her sun-kissed locks spilling over her shoulders as she exchanged soft words with a client. Lucius felt an unexpected tug of curiosity, a desire to capture her beauty in words that might outlast her fleeting presence in this city. And so, with a hesitant breath, he resolved to write her into his poetry, believing her radiant hair might somehow redefine the ideals he held dear. As days passed, Lucius found himself torn between admiration and uncertainty. The more he observed Aurelia, the more conscious he became of the subtle differences between his traditional ideals and her exotic allure. His verses struggled with this tension. How could a Roman ideal of beauty, rooted in symmetry and modesty, accommodate the wild shimmer of golden hair that seemed almost foreign? Conversations with acquaintances offered little clarity, only whispers of amusement at his fascination. Meanwhile, Aurelia continued her daily routines, braiding her hair while humming softly, trading fleeting smiles with passers-by, unaware of how her presence disrupted the poetic calm of Lucius's world. Slowly, the image of her sunlit hair became a symbol of something both desirable and perplexing, echoing unresolved questions. In the quiet hours of reflection, Lucius began to notice the irony of his situation, that the very idea of capturing Aurelia's beauty in praise might diminish it. His verses, once filled with eager admiration, now slipped into a gentle mockery of his own efforts, revealing the human tendency to idolize what remains elusive. Aurelia's face, always framed by her golden tresses, seemed to mock his earnest attempts. Her expression blurred in his mind's eye, softened by the distance of his expectations. The city, too, seemed to hold a quiet humor, where notions of ideal beauty clashed gently with reality. Lucius, sitting beneath a vine-covered colonnade, realized that some images of beauty were better left as fleeting visions rather than fixed in imperfect words, and so he let his pen rest, content to simply observe in the quiet, unassuming way of those who know the world's small absurdities. Over time, a calming realization settled within Lucius, a recognition that beauty, whether golden or modest, exists in moments, not in verses. He began to see Aurelia not as an ideal to be immortalized, but as a human being, softly indifferent to his hopes and his poetry. Her hair, once such a symbol of exotic charm, now seemed to hold the ordinary warmth of everyday life, lighter by the sun, softer at the touch. In this gentle acceptance, Lucius found a kind of peace. The city's slow hum became a backdrop to an expanding understanding that perhaps beauty, like life, was best appreciated without the need for perfect words or fixed ideals. He watched her from a respectful distance, feeling a faint smile that did not need to chase after the perfect verse, but simply rest in the quiet kindness of ordinary moments. Reflecting on the whole incident, Lucius recognized that the allure of Aurelia's golden hair had whispered a quiet lesson, one about the fleeting nature of beauty and the folly of chasing eternal ideals. The city, filled with its muted sounds, and simple routines had given him a story not of ideal perfection, but of gentle human imperfection, an imperfect glimpse of something wonderfully ordinary. The faces of prophets and muses remained blurred in his mind's eye, unmoved by his poetic pursuits, yet somehow offering a subtle reassurance. As he watched Aurelia disappear into the bustling street, he understood that some beauties are meant to be seen, appreciated briefly, and then let go, like the slow unfolding of dawn at the end of a long, quiet day. In the stillness, he found a quiet, sleepy acknowledgement of life's modest absurdity and enduring charm. Under the soft glow of late afternoon, Lucius wandered through the quiet aisles of the library, his fingers trailing over parchment scrolls that spoke quietly of beauty's ideals. He paused to observe Aurelia, whose hair caught fragments of sunlight, shimmering like fields of wheat swaying in a gentle breeze. His mind fashioned verses that likened her luminous strands to the dawn's, first light, subtle, warm, and ever promising. The air smelled faintly of olive oil and aged paper, the sounds of distant voices blending into a calm hum, as if the world itself was settling into a tranquil understanding of beauty. It was a simple admiration, tinged with the timeless human desire to grasp fleeting perfection in words and sights alike. As Lucius shared his verses at the gathering, Marcellus, with an air of mild boredom, scoffed softly, his voice edged with light irony. He dismissed what he called the superficial obsession with blondness, suggesting it reflected foreign decadence rather than Roman virtue. The air shifted slightly. Aurelia's face, unseen and blurred by shadow, remained untouched by the confrontation, while Lucius' cheeks tinged faintly with a hint of frustration. Yet no harsh words were exchanged, only the quiet tension of differing tastes and moral echoes, as if beauty itself was being questioned amidst shared sips of wine. And the rustle of fallen leaves outside, the scene lingered like a half-remembered dream of classical debates and subtle dismissals. In the days that followed, Lucius found himself reflecting on the irony that such simple qualities, light hair, a hint of sunlight, could stir so much debate among poets and philosophers alike. He chuckled softly at the thought that the very thing he admired might be dismissed as foreign influence or superficial show. The sun continued its slow descent, casting a warm amber hue over the garden where he often sat, pondering how fleeting notions of beauty could hold such weight in quiet circles. His eye moved over Aurelia's portrait, etched softly into memory, and he realized that perhaps the most enduring beauty was in the subtlety of appreciation rather than the clamor of approval. The moment settled into a gentle, contemplative calm as the world grew darker and more distant yet somehow more real. With the arrival of evening, Lucius returned to his routine writing, observing, and quietly defending the muse that inspired his verses. He acknowledged, with a faint smile, that beauty for each mind was a quiet, personal thing, like the slow, unhurried passage of time. Marcellus' skepticism floated by like a distant shadow, barely disturbing the stillness. A soft wind stirred the trees outside, carrying echoes of old debates, but inside, the calm persisted, reflective of a shared human tendency to seek meaning in the ordinary. Perhaps, Lucius thought, the simplest of images, a woman's hair, glowing softly, held 1,000 unspoken stories, each as valid as the next, in their quiet dignity. The evening deepened, but left the mind at ease, as stories of ideals gradually melted into memories of everyday grace. Looking back, Lucius understood that beauty's ideals, no matter how poetically crafted or fiercely defended, ultimately rested on the eye that beholds the warmth of sunlight, the softness of wheat, the fleeting nature of dawn, the fuss of debates, and the sharpness of words faded into gentle acknowledgement of human imperfection and silent longing. Aurelia's sunlit hair remained a humble symbol, neither decadence nor foreign influence, but simply part of the quiet human experience of noticing. As shadows lengthened and night approached, the world slowed down, inviting a quiet appreciation for the small, unremarkable moments that, strangely, carry the most enduring truths. It was a reminder, perhaps, that beauty resides more in the calm acknowledgement of life's simple details than in the loud proclamations of its ideals. It was a quiet morning at the ancient forum, where poets gathered beneath the faded pillars, their voices low and deliberate. The annual contest at the Temple of Apollo seemed an unremarkable event, an excuse for some, a celebration for others. But for Lucius, it was an opportunity to carve his words into the slow-moving sands of reputation. As he laid out his parchment, the air carried a faint scent of olives and dust, whispering of countless similar days when beauty was measured in words rather than faces. The crowd's expectant silence made the faint scratching of his stylus seem louder, almost urgent, as if the very act of composing was a quiet act of defiance against time. In these moments, it felt enough simply to be part of the ongoing, if tired, search for what might be considered lovely. As the contest approached, tension shadowed the usually peaceful gathering. Political patrons, draped in simple tunics, whispered behind their hands about the right way to praise beauty, preferring golden hair or fair skin, suggesting that even poetic praise was stitched into the fabric of social power. Lucius found himself pulled between authentic admiration and the necessity to conform. his hesitations flickering like faint candle flames in a stale breeze. Meanwhile, Aurelia's reputation, a silent, elegant figure, became entangled in the bubbling jealousy of rival suitors, who cast sidelong glances and murmured in corners, their voices like distant waves crashing within stone-walled courtyards. The deadline crept closer, and the weight of unspoken expectations pressed lightly, yet insistently, upon everyone's shoulders. In the midst of it all, irony quietly settled in words about beauty, already narrow in scope, now dragged deeper into absurdity. Poets debated whether blonde hair should be described as strands of spun gold or sunlight caught in a mirror, each phrase subtly weaving the same unchanging idea that beauty was something almost external, a fragile veneer easily catalogued and confined. Lucius's lines, once hopeful, now seemed tinged with a subtle humor. How many ways could one describe shining hair? The patrons, obliviously earnest, nodded along, their expressions as fixed as the statues that lined the city. Aurelia's admirers begged her to attend the contest, their whispered promises muffled beneath the weight of their own shallow pursuits. Still, time pressed on, indifferent and inevitable, as the last pages of the ode awaited their turn to be read aloud. Calm seeped into the scene, as if the hour had exhausted its excitement, settling into a slow, reflective quietness. Lucius, having finished his ode, watched as others prepared their verses, their faces softening with the patience only familiarity could bring. The soft murmur of voices, the gentle shuffle of scrolls, these had become part of the unchanging rhythm of the contest. Aurelia, now seated comfortably on a bench, looked outward with quiet dignity, her gaze steady but unhurried. The light waned lazily, casting pale shadows across the marble floors, and somewhere a distant flute played a slow, fading tune. It was not necessarily a moment of victory or defeat, but rather one of stillness, where each person quietly recognized the slow passage of time, caught between memory and anticipation. As the contest drew to a close, there was no great revelation, only the softly spoken acknowledgement that human ideas of beauty are as fleeting as a shadow at dusk, unchanged, yet endlessly changing. Lucius allowed himself a small, weary smile, knowing that tomorrow would bring new words, new patrons, and new jealous glances. The ancient city, with its quiet, tired grandeur, seemed to hold its breath, content to witness another chapter of human longing and shallow praise. There was a kind of peaceful irony in this ongoing search. No matter how many verses were spoken, beauty remained as elusive as the horizon's distant gleam, just beyond reach, yet always worth a gentle pursuit. And so the day closed slowly, like a book softly shut after a long, unhurried reading. In the quiet days of Rome, during an era when beauty was often associated with the glow of bright hair, poets began to craft verses that praised the luminous blonde figures they observed. It was a time when a woman's hair could elevate her status, and those with golden strands seemed touched by divine light. Among the poets, Lucius, known for his slow, deliberate tone, prepared to recite a hymn at a local contest, eager but calm in his customary manner. As he arranged his scroll, the air was thick with anticipation. Yet the crowd's expectations moved soundlessly beneath the soft shimmer of late afternoon sun. The event felt both ordinary and quietly significant, as if a simple poem could reshape ideals just by being spoken aloud amidst the gentle rustle of tunics and the shimmering warmth of the setting day. On the day of the contest, Lucius took his place before the assembly, his voice emerging slowly, almost hesitantly, as he began describing Aurelia's hair, bright, golden rays that seemed to carry echoes of divine sunshine. His words, wrapped in the rhythm of the spoken word, invoked Venus and Apollo, gods of love and light, as if her luminous hair belonged to some sacred gift bestowed by the heavens. The crowd listened in a mix of awe and mild skepticism. Some eyes widened, others looked away, distracted by the muted swish of silken robes. The judges leaned forward, their faces blurred, unreadable, but expectant, as the poetic praise stretched on. A hush settled, broken only by the faint whisper of a breeze, making the moment oddly suspended in a gentle, human stillness. As Lucius's hymn wove through the air, a ripple of irony infiltrated the scene. The crowd, so often straightforward in its preferences, found the glowing words met with divided reactions. Some hearts warmed, others remained stone-like, amused or untouched by the poetic ideal. A few young men smirked faintly, exchanging glances as if to say, "Isn't this a bit much?" Meanwhile, the judges' expressions flickered, unsure whether to praise or dismiss the lofty praise for blonde beauty, a concept so easily inflated, yet so deeply rooted. The myth of the divine light in hair seemed almost absurd in its grandeur. Yet no one dared to break the silence. The scene, quiet and slow, hinted that beauty's favored light might always cast long shadows of fleeting human judgment. Then, unexpectedly, the emperor himself entered the modest contest chamber, his presence adding weight and calm to the moment. He listened with slow, measured attention, his face partly obscured by a softness of shadow that rendered his features unknowable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm yet firm, simple words that acknowledged Lucius's effort, but also quietly shifted the taste of the gathering. He praised the ideal of blonde beauty as a divine gift, yet with an understated tone that hinted at its superficiality, and enduring human desire for light and perfection. The crowd absorbed this, some nodding slowly, others merely blinking, the irony passing subtly like a gentle breeze. The praise, gentle and unassuming, left behind a lingering sense that even greatness was just another fleeting moment in the grand, quiet flow of history. In the days that followed, the story of the contest slid quietly into the background of everyday life, like a faint whisper on the edge of memory. The poetic praise for Orlia's luminous hair remained a symbol of a fleeting ideal that both elevated and mocked its own beauty. Reflecting slowly, one might see how these ideals are woven into human habits. Bright hair, rare and treasured, becoming an easy obsession. The sun continued its slow journey across the sky, indifferent to the fleeting nature of such human pursuits. Perhaps in time, the simple act of praise and the slow shifting of taste reminded everyone that beauty, much like history itself, was a quiet, ever-changing story, ironic, impermanent, and gently humbling in its persistence. In the gentle dawn of Roman poetic tradition, a whisper coursed through the marble halls, an emerging fascination with a particular kind of beauty. Poets, scribbling on wax tablets or murmuring beneath their vine-covered terraces, began to mention blonde women with a quiet reverence, their descriptions soft as the light spilling through colonnades. It was as though a new muse had slipped quietly into their pages, unnoticed at first, but slowly shaping the contours of Roman ideals. Orlia's luminous hair, perhaps, flickered in the poets' minds as a rare spark, an echo of distant northern suns, cherished yet not fully understood. And so, the notion of blonde beauty was woven into their verses, a faint glow that lingered in the background of their nightly recitations, waiting to be felt slowly and softly. As seasons turned, the poetry shifted, and the image of Orlia took on a quiet importance, her appearance becoming a subtle symbol in the wider cultural fabric. Poets, now more deliberate, painted her with words that half glanced like sunlight on water, bright and elusive, yet profoundly present. Somewhere between admiration and irony, they described her hair as spun gold, her skin like morning cream, distinctions both gentle and strangely precise. It was as if her silent, unassuming presence nudged at an already shifting standard, complicating the typical Roman ideals rooted in dark hair and tanned skin. The lines grew longer, more deliberate, and the tension in their verses hinted at a desire to capture the light that Orlia seemed to embody, fragile, fleeting, yet oddly permanent. With the spread of Orlia's fame, the more humorous side of the poet's reliance on her image surfaced. A slow, almost amused irony crept into their words. Poems, once solemn, now occasionally included riddles about whether her hair was truly gold or merely a trick of the sun. A play on the illusions of beauty. Some scribblers chuckled behind their scrolls, whispering that perhaps the muse's golden hair was a way of hiding something more mundane, an idle strand, a trick of the light, a human imperfection that no amount of poetry could conceal. Yet the rhyme persisted, and the admiration endured, as if the human tendency to elevate superficial beauty was both inevitable and quietly amusing. The poets' voices, still gentle, carried a faint smile beneath their words, a recognition of the absurdity woven into their crafted verses. Over time, the initial fascination calmed into an acceptance, and Orlia's image became less of a fleeting muse and more of an enduring silhouette in the collective memory, simple, understated, quietly revered. Poets, once obsessed with capturing her radiance, now reflected with a touch of gentle indifference, as if recognizing that such beauty was merely a passing flicker in the vast twilight of human pursuits. The verses, soft and unhurried, settled into a calmer rhythm, glowing softly like the last light on a calm evening. Their words wound into the fabric of daily life, blending Orlia's myth with the mundane realities of Roman existence, where beauty was appreciated neither too much nor too little. And in this quiet space, the idea of her golden hair lingered like the faint scent of incense long after it had faded. Looking back, Lucius mused on how a single figure had subtly shifted the Roman canon of beauty, leaving behind a trail of golden verses that persisted beyond stone statues and marble busts. The story had become a small, silent chapter in the endless book of human longing, an echo of the muse who, with her quiet glow, showed that beauty often dwells in the subtle, the fleeting, and the imperfect. The old poets, perhaps, would find some humor in this, that their admiration had become a quiet monument, a faint shimmer in the vast quiet of history's watchful silence. And so, in the calm of the day's end, amidst the fading sounds of daily life, the image of Orlia's hair remained softly alive, a gentle reminder that even the most mundane desires can leave behind a lasting, if sleepy, mark. In the quiet mornings of early Rome, a young scholar named Lucius carefully unrolled a scroll into the pale light filtering through a narrow window. His eyes, dull but curious, lingered on the faded lines of Greek poetry brought by wandering itinerants like Callias, whose stories of luminous, golden-haired gods with flowing robes and serene faces seemed almost too delicate for the weight of the city's marble streets. These tales, full of light and shadow, offered a gentle alternative to the pragmatic daily grind of Roman life. As Lucius listened, a slow flicker of fascination awakened within him, a quiet curiosity about these beings who wandered from distant Olympus to his bustling, often dusty world. Still, amidst the hum of markets and the clatter of daily chores, the notion of divine blonde figures remained a faint dream, fragile, distant, and somewhat absurd in its lofty grandeur. Gradually, the stories took root among some of Rome's more contemplative elites, who began to discuss these mythic figures with a cautious intrigue that bordered on skepticism. Shadowed by the flickering lamps, they debated whether these luminous deities might reflect something true, perhaps ideals or virtues that Rome itself lacked. Yet behind their eyes, a subtle irony persisted. These tales, so obviously borrowed from afar, seemed to drift like forgotten echoes over the monumental ruins of Roman order. Callias's stories, now smuggled into whispered conversations, became magnets for admiration and quiet mockery alike. The divine blondness, once a distant concept, had begun its slow pilgrimage into Roman consciousness, tangled with the practicalities and imperfections of their world. And so, the myth teetered, half believed, half perceived, like a distant sound, fading into the calm of a late afternoon. It was perhaps ironic that as Roman elites admired these mythic ideals, the stories subtly altered to suit their pragmatic tastes. The shining figures lost some of their distant radiance, replaced by more human, flawed representations. The allure lay partly in their foreignness, yet also in the way these tales could be tweaked. One's divine gods with hair as golden as the evening sun, yet with faces blurred beneath a veil of suggestion, hidden by light or shadow. Callias's words, once simple stories, morphed into cultural currency. They were traded at dinner tables, ornate masks for the mundane truths of Roman life. The mythic blonde gods lingered, almost sleepily, in the corners of their imaginations, an ironic relic of a distant Greece that had seeped quietly into their own still, measured existence. The stories, now slightly worn, murmured along quiet avenues like a gentle breeze, passing through old, sun-warmed stones. Over time, these imported tales found a calm home within the Roman intellectual landscape, a slow, unremarkable settling of foreign ideas into everyday reflection. Scholars, poets, and craftsmen incorporated hints of Olympus's luminous deities into their work, often in subtle ways that avoided overt reverence, but acknowledged a shared sense of fascination. In the soft glow of evening, as artisans crafted delicate ornaments or scribes recorded stories, The golden-haired gods became almost an understated symbol, neither sacred nor mundane, just quietly present. Callias's stories, with their blurred faces and gentle myths, rested comfortably in the communal memory, like old furniture gathered in familiar rooms. They served less as divine commands and more as silent reminders of the distant, sleepy beauty of legends carried across waves of history, muted yet persistent in the slow unfolding of cultural exchange. The influence of Greek myth, particularly the blonde, luminous figures, became a gentle thread woven into the fabric of Roman life. It was a story told in whispers, in quiet admiration, and in knowing smirks at the irony that these distant gods, with their shining hair and hidden faces, had quietly shaped a society that prided itself on practicality. Perhaps, in some subtle way, these myths offered a moment of reflection amid the endless march of affairs, a reminder that even in the most persistent routines, the human mind dutifully seeks beauty and distant light. And so, in their calm, contemplative way, the Romans absorbed the glittering allure of Olympus, not as a revolution, but as a faintly amused whisper caught in the warm, sleepy air of history's slow passage. In quiet corners of Roman markets and shaded forums, whispers of Greek mythology began to drift into daily life, carried by merchants and artisans with slow, deliberate gestures. The stories of Apollo's golden chariot and Aphrodite's shimmering beauty found a soft echo among traders and craftsmen, their images flickering in the flickering light of oil lamps. Slowly, Romans took these tales for their own, weaving motifs of divine athletes and radiant figures into mosaics and minted coins, their edges worn yet proud. It was as if the very fabric of everyday objects was gently kissed by the sun, carrying a promise of divine presence amid mundane routines. Yet, amidst this quiet admiration, the older priestly circles watched with a measured patience, wary of the unfamiliar shine starting to eclipse their own familiar shadows. As the myth spread further, a tension quietly unfurled, like a subtle crack in a smooth stone. Priests and elders debated the significance of these new images. Some saw them as blasphemous embellishments, others as harmless artistry. Statues bearing golden laurels and delicate depictions of gods appeared alongside traditional symbols, and the air grew tinged with a slow, almost imperceptible friction. The craftsmen, accustomed to local gods and straightforward symbols, found themselves torn, some eager to imitate the divine radiance, others cautious of straying beyond accepted borders. The marketplace hummed softly with the noise of disagreement, yet no one seemed in a rush to draw sharp lines, perhaps because Even the most heated words sounded softer in the slow, contemplative cadence of evening. Irony settled quietly like a gentle dust, as the more conservative voices scoffed at the bright, glamorous depictions, claiming they overshadowed the humble virtues of old Rome. Meanwhile, ordinary passers-by paused at mosaics in the temple courtyards, their faces wearing a mild bemusement, caught between old traditions and the shimmering allure of new stories. The golden motifs began to appear in small, almost accidental places, on coins that clinked softly in waiting hands, on jewelry worn cautiously. The gods in gold, once a novelty, subtly infiltrated the familiar routines, turning simple errands into silent acts of admiration or subtle rebellion. It was as if the divine was quietly slipping into the cracks of an already layered, imperfect society, not with grand gestures, but in small, indelible touches. By then, the clash of ideas had settled into a kind of slow, comfortable coexistence. The craftsmen learned to carve without too much worry. Priests adjusted their language, sometimes turning a blind eye, sometimes questioning quietly. The shimmering images persisted in the periphery on jewelry, coins, and worn frescoes, reminding everyone of a shifting boundary. People went about their days with a mild awareness, each mindful of what their neighbors admired or dismissed. There was no grand declaration, only the gentle persistence of change threading through routines that had long felt steady. In these quiet moments, there was a shared understanding that tradition was not static, but gently elastic, stretching at the edges in a way that required patience rather than resistance. Looking back, it seems that the influence of Greek myth and gold was less about sudden upheaval and more about subtle, ongoing conversations beneath the surface of everyday life. The myths persisted, woven quietly into the fabric of Roman culture, softening edges and sharpening others, like the slow patina of age on a well-used coin. In their own unhurried way, people adapted, celebrated, and quietly questioned, each small act adding to the ongoing story of a society in relaxed flux. Perhaps, in the slow glow of history, it's the small, almost unnoticed shifts that leave the deepest marks, reminding us that even the most radiant stories are woven from countless silent threads. In the waning light of the Roman day, the city seemed to settle into a familiar quiet, with citizens strolling languidly past marble statues and shaded forums. News of the new foreign gods, with their shimmering golden hair and enigmatic smiles, had begun to drift through the marketplace like a soft breeze, whispered and half-missed. The temples gleamed, yet beneath their quiet facades, a gentle shift was stirring, as if the very air carried a faint anticipation. Lucius and Callias, old acquaintances in the Senate, watched from distant corners, their expressions calm, but aware of subtle undercurrents. It was a time when idolizing foreign myths could be mundane. Yet, beneath that mundanity, the shadows of politics stretched too far, and everyone knew it. Gradually, the calm rippled into a gentle tension, as factions arose with quiet disputes over the influence of these blonde gods' tailies. A rival group circulated stories, harmless on the surface, but tinged with a quiet critique, questioning whether the virtues Roman society held dear could truly stand up to these imported ideals. The city's officials, each with their own small fears or ambitions, moved cautiously. Censorship fluttered like a thin veil over certain texts, and the threat of exile hung silently in the breeze. Lucius and Callias found themselves caught in a slow dance of diplomacy, where every word might tilt the balance or deepen the shadows. In this fragile state, even a whispered joke could resonate like a dropped pebble in a still pond. Irony crept in softly, as the gods with their striking blonde hair, too perfect, too pristine, began to symbolize more than mere myth. They became icons of superficial beauty, undermining the very virtues they were meant to embody. Politicians paused before mentioning gods, aware of their double meanings, while the common folk chuckled quietly at the absurdity. The stories, once simple tailies, now seemed to mirror the contradictions of Roman life: prestige and pretension, strength and fragility, interwoven like the dark soil beneath their feet. A respected orator's voice, blurred behind a shadowed light, echoed as he spoke of tradition. Yet his words often betrayed a flicker of doubt. The city's identity, like a delicate tapestry, showed loose threads, waiting to unravel or be carefully stitched anew. Eventually, a calm acceptance settled, as if the city had decided to let the waves of change lap gently at its shores. The constant commentary on the mythic blonde gods faded into the background, replaced by quiet routines: a merchant counting coins, children playing in shaded courtyards, scholars poring slowly over old scrolls. Lucius and Callias moved through these small moments together, appreciating the quiet resilience pressed into everyday life. Some saw in this gentle adaptation a kind of wisdom, holding onto tradition while allowing for the subtle influence of distant stories. The city seemed to breathe in a peaceful, measured rhythm, balancing light and shadow, myth and reality, much like a slow sunset that neither fully darkens nor brightens the sky. In the soft aftermath, the story lingered, like a faint whisper in the corners of Pompeii or in the quiet alleys of Rome, an enduring reminder that human communities, despite their foibles and fears, often drift through change with with a resigned patience. The influence of those golden-haired deities, once seen as provocative, became part of the city's layered history, faintly humorous, quietly troubling, and undeniably human. Lucius and Callias, like countless others, observed with gentle detachment the slow unfolding of shadow and light, a mosaic of stories, always incomplete. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson whispered by time itself, that even in a city eager to define its soul, the true story is often told in subtle shades, in those small, unnoticed acts of daily life. On a calm morning in the Roman Forum, the grandeur of the new temple to Apollo stood quietly against the soft hues of early light. Stones were still cool beneath the fingertips of laborers, and the faint scent of fresh mortar lingered in the air. No one yet expected the day's quiet routine to be interrupted. Even the birds seemed to pause knowingly. As officials prepared the ceremonial offerings, the sense of anticipation was measured, almost polite, as if the city itself was holding its breath in gentle patience. It was, in essence, a moment of mundane hope, the kind that passes unnoticed, but feels significant in its stillness. Suddenly, amid the low hum of chatter and the clink of tools, a flicker of orange and red burst from the temple's entrance. A small fire had ignited unexpectedly, crackling with a quiet urgency that caused quick, uncertain glances among those nearby. The flames licked at sacred symbols and draped cloths, threatening to jump to the wooden scaffolding. The crowd hesitated, caught between instinct and tradition, momentarily uncertain whether to panic or to act. The temple's new stones felt suddenly fragile, the air thick with the smell of ash and fear. A small disaster that felt unnervingly out of place amid the morning's order. As the flames grew, a touch of irony shadowed the scene. The very mythic figures revered in stories, golden heroes, indomitable gods, became unlikely references in this awkward struggle. Greek priests, faces obscured by the shadows and glow of the fire, directed their gestures toward unseen deities, while Roman soldiers, accustomed to discipline, but slightly bemused, hesitated before rushing to douse the flames. The mythic heroics of Apollo and his gleaming, invincible kin seemed distant now, as fingers fumbled with buckets of water and blankets. In a strange twist of irony, the divine valor celebrated in stories was momentarily replaced by mundane human effort, simple and slightly awkward, trying to tame fire with slow, careful hands. Gradually, the fire was brought under control, and a quiet calm settled back over the scene. The temple, though scarred, remained standing, much like the stoic figures of myth that oversaw the city's daily rhythm. The people's faces, now framed by gentle shadows, reflected a mix of relief and tired amusement at how life's small emergencies often drew the same quiet response from everyone: mistrust of myths, reliance on effort, and a shared sense of quiet resilience. The priests and soldiers, exchanging weary glances, resumed their roles, as if knowing that life, like stories, often paused at moments of chaos, only to settle back into its slow, predictable pace. The sun continued its silent journey across an empty sky, indifferent and calm. Later, as the day waned into soft twilight, it seemed that the event, small, accidental, and somewhat humorous, had cemented a gentle truth. The myths of heroes and gods, while comforting stories, are perhaps merely reflections of human patience and imperfect effort. People returned to their routines, carrying only the faint memory of flickering flames and blurred faces behind shadows. The temple, with its scarred walls, stood quietly as a symbol of resilience, not divine intervention, but steady, human perseverance. And under the quiet evening sky, the city's heartbeat continued, slow and sure, as if reminding itself that even in the most mundane moments, meaning quietly indoors, in the slow ebb of Roman days, it was as if the shining figures from Greek myths had quietly made their way into the marble shadows of Roman temples. The Romans, ever practical, watched these Western divinities, blonde, radiant, and slightly amused, enter their calendar and rituals with a gentle curiosity. Lucius, with his steady hand and aging eyes, recorded this blending of worlds in a humble chronicle, noting how the gods' appearances stubbornly persisted like a faint glow behind a cloud. The glow, perhaps, was more comforting than threatening, a familiar flicker in their daily routines of cooking, bathing, and resting. Meanwhile, the mythology's subtle shift fostered small but persistent smiles among those who knew that these luminous figures had truly become part of something quietly enduring. Yet beneath this calm surface, the tension of cultural transformation flickered lightly. The Romans, with their penchant for order, found themselves subtly amused by how the Greek blonde gods, once fierce and mythical, now often appeared as gentle icons in household shrines. Priests and citizens alike offered offerings, sometimes more out of habit than conviction, to gods whose faces seemed blurred, their identities softened by the warm light of collected reverence. A bather in a communal bath might glance at a small sculpture of Apollo, amused at how even the most vital myth had been reduced to a pleasant decoration. A faint irony not missed, but mostly ignored. The irony lied in the careful domestication of divine radiance, which now shimmered quietly in the routine of everyday life, blending seamlessly into their quiet, sunlit hours. despite the serene continuity, there was a subtle hum of quiet skepticism, an oddness in how these mythic figures hung on the peripheries of their consciousness, almost forgotten, but never entirely dismissed. The bright blonde gods, once symbols of distant heroism and fierce battles, seemed to have become fixtures, like the worn pottery and familiar streets that made up their daily world. Prophets no longer spoke with faces in shadow. Instead, their voices were replaced by the casual murmurs of craftsmen and merchants, softly joking about divine hair or divine weather. The irony was gentle, how abstract ideals had become mundane symbols, witnesses to the slow passage of ordinary days, their luminous beauty now a background hum to the quiet rhythm of life. In these moments of calm, the mythology's influence settled gently into a familiar patience, as if the divine sun had become part of the landscape, unchangeable and quietly still. The wooden altars where offerings once clinked with lively intent now sat silent, softly worn by time and gentle use. The citizens moved through their routines beneath the watchful gaze of these golden echoes. Lucius's chronicle, slightly faded at the edges, softly whispered of how culture, like the seasons, adopted new shapes without alarming the senses. Their stories, once bold and mythic, had become woven into everyday life, soft threads that shimmered quietly above their heads, a gentle reminder of distant, shining origins. And so, in the quiet aftermath, the blonde mythologies lingered like faint sunlight filtering through a window, faint, warm, unhurried. Rome, with all its pragmatic grace, had retreated into a calm acknowledgement of the divine's gentle presence, something to be noticed in the everyday rituals and the soft histories recorded by elders. Lucius's words, now perhaps more nostalgic than revelatory, sealed the luminous grace of those ancient figures into the fabric of their society, an understated legacy that echoed softly across time, neither loud nor boastful, simply present. As the days slipped by, the myth of the shining gods remained as a peaceful glow, faint but enduring, woven into the slow, ordinary story of their lives. In the quiet hours of a Roman morning, Livia, a young blonde slave with gentle features, arrived at the grand domus of Gaius Marcellus. The heavy wooden door swung open slowly, revealing a cool, dim interior filled with the soft rustling of linens and the faint scent of olives. She stepped inside barefooted, feeling the cool stones under her toes, unaware that her presence was now woven into the delicate tapestry of this elite household, an unseen thread in the bustling fabric of Roman life. Her eyes flicked across the vaulted ceilings and marble statues, both proud and indifferent, hinting at the silent hierarchy she was about to learn. The house seemed both vast and oddly still, holding its secrets with quiet patience, waiting for her small, uncertain steps to find their place among the others. As days seeped into evenings, Livia's routines intertwined with the household's quiet rituals, filling pitchers with water, folding fabrics with careful, practiced motions, her light hair occasionally catching the flickering glow of oil lamps. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a subtle tension grew as she learned that her role was neither entirely trivial nor entirely secure. The matron, with her smooth dispassion, observed her from behind veiled eyes, and the other servants, including the older women, maintained a gentle but unyielding distance. One evening, while adjusting a tapestry, Livia overheard a fleeting whisper of household rules about what was expected, what was tolerated, and what remained invisible. The house, it seemed, was a quiet stage where power was expressed not loudly, but in small, measured steps. A peculiar irony settled over the household like a soft dust. The blonde girl, the newest among many, was both valued and overlooked, cherished for her novelty, yet unnoticed in the steady hum of daily life. Livia's movements seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. Her presence, a gentle reminder of the fragile balance between service and status. She occasionally caught the faint shadow of the master during his brief appearances, his face blurred by shadows or sunlight, unseen, yet undeniably influential. The children, lively and curious, played amid the silence, their voices muffled by thick walls. Everything felt perpetually suspended in a slow, almost humorous stasis, where the mundane decisions of daily life quietly dictated the rhythm of their shared existence. Gradually, Livia settled into the rhythm of the house, her body remembering each task with a quiet, unspoken proficiency. She learned to read the subtle signals, the glances, the pauses, the small gestures that dictated her place in this social hierarchy. The house radiated an almost meditative calm, broken only by the distant murmurs of conversation or the soft footsteps of passing servants. She often paused to observe the household's quiet moments, an empty tray, a hand resting lightly on a marble ledge, the flicker of a jewelry clasp. In these small, unremarkable moments, Livia found a strange, calming truth. That life in this ancient home moved to a slow, enduring pulse, indifferent to individual hopes or fears. Eventually, Livia reflected on her place within this silent, sprawling house, a story written in subtle gestures and unspoken rules. The house, like the city beyond its walls, was a vast, complex organism where each part played its role, however modest or unseen. She understood that her existence was woven into this fabric of quiet routines, each day a gentle reminder of life's persistent yet understated impermanence. As she stood by a window, watching an olive branch sway in a soft breeze, a faint smile touched her lips, not from happiness, but from the quiet acceptance of her humble, yet meaningful, place in this old, sprawling world. And perhaps, she thought softly, that was enough. In a home built on layers of quiet history and gentle irony, Livia stepped through the atrium of the domus as the late afternoon sun filtered through the portico, its warm light catching the pale hair of the blond slaves who moved like quiet ribbons between marble columns. She felt the coolness of the tiled floor under her sandals and heard the soft rustle of linen as the women adjusted their simple tunics, each strand of gold catching a fleeting gleam. The household's master had asked her to observe the daily rhythms, noting how the blonde slaves were set apart not just by appearance, but by the subtle expectations that clung to them like perfume. Their faces bore a gentle composure, eyes half closed in a habitual readiness to please, while their hands traced the surfaces of silverware with deliberate tenderness. In that still moment, Livia sensed that the quiet elegance of the servants held a story waiting to be uncovered. A rusted whisper rose from the kitchen doorway when Marcia, the older handmaid with dark braids, caught sight of Livia's lingering glance toward the blonde servant named Orlia. The scent of spiced stew mixed with a faint metallic tang of tension, and Marcia's fingers tightened around the edge of a wooden bowl, the grain pressing into her palm. She muttered a low warning about the danger of foreign curiosity, suggesting that the blonde's role extended beyond mere decoration to the unseen currents of the family's private affairs. Livia felt the subtle shift in the air, a cool draft that seemed to carry Marcia's suspicion like a whispered rumor. The tension lingered, making the stone walls feel slightly tighter, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Later, as evening candles flickered, Orlia was summoned to entertain guests, her golden hair catching the amber glow, while she poured wine with a practiced grace that seemed at once effortless and rehearsed. Between serving, she slipped a folded papyrus to a young scribe, delivering a discreet message that would alter a minor dispute over estate boundaries, an act concealed beneath the veneer of hospitality. The irony lay in how the very attribute that made her a visual asset, her exotic hair, also rendered her a covert conduit for whispering politics, a role hidden beneath the clink of goblets. Livia observed the smooth surface of the polished table, feeling the slight tremor of a reed pipe as a guest laughed, unaware of the undercurrents moving within the shadows. The scene unfolded with a calm that disguised the intricate choreography of power and perception. When the guests departed and the hearth's fire settled into a low, steady ember, the household returned to its quieter cadence. Aurelia washed the remaining cups, the water cooling her fingertips, while Marcia resumed sweeping the courtyard, the broom's bristles whispering against stone. Livia lingered near a cracked mosaic, feeling the gentle warmth radiating from the walls, and listened to the soft sigh of the night wind through the open shutters. The day's discord softened into a rhythm of ordinary tasks, each motion measured, each breath measured, as shadows lengthened across the floor. In the hush, the house seemed to exhale, accepting its layered roles with a patient, understated grace. As darkness deepened, Livia reflected on the silent agreements that bound the household, noting how the blonde slave's visibility both protected and exposed them to subtle manipulation. She considered the thin line between admiration and exploitation, feeling the weight of history in the faint aroma of drying herbs that lingered in the air. The gentle creak of a wooden door reminded her that every entrance and exit carried the imprint of those who passed, regardless of status. In that stillness, she understood that the household's secrets were not grand conspiracies, but the accumulated small gestures that defined human connection. With a soft sigh, Livia accepted the quiet lesson that history, much like the house itself, rests on the unremarkable moments that persist long after the clamor fades. In the slow hush of a Roman morning, Livia moved quietly through the patterned mosaic corridors of the household, her delicate frame blending into the routine hum of domestic life. With her fair hair tucked beneath a simple veil, she performed her duties with a measured patience, unaware that her loyalty was quietly being tested by whispers from the shadows. Gaius' looming study walls held secrets in scrolls and silenced ambition, while she, a quiet witness, bore her role with a practiced calm that concealed the faint tremor of uncertainty. Around her, the familiar sounds, the soft clatter of dishes, the faint echo of footsteps seemed to emphasize the ordinary unreliability of trust. It was a day like many others, yet beneath the surface lay the fragility of human bonds, subtly disturbed by a dangerous game unfolding unseen. When Gaius' rival, a figure cloaked in ambition and desperation, discreetly stole the precious scroll, Livia sensed the shifting air. A cold ripple ran down her spine as she was unexpectedly summoned to carry a message through the labyrinthine alleys of the city. Her hands, warmed by everyday chores, now trembled slightly as she clutched the rolled-up parchment, an object loaded with silent peril. The bustling streets and quiet courtyards blurred past her vision as she navigated the underbelly of Rome, the shadowy, uneven alleyways, the faint scent of damp stone, the distant calls of merchants. The narrow passage tested her courage, forcing her to choose obedience over retreat, loyalty over fear, amid a city that seemed to hum with quiet indifference to her personal risk. In that moment, the fragile trust she had with the Marcellus children hovered like a thin, fragile thread. Irony settled over her journey like a slow, persistent fog. Her role as a mere courier, expected to remain unnoticed, was fraught with unknowable dangers. As she slipped past guards and slipped through narrow doorways, the reality of her fragile task revealed itself with subtle, almost humorous moments. A misstep could mean discovery, yet a hurried glance from a passing soldier might be enough to betray her. The city's cold stone corridors seemed to watch her with detached patience. The blurred faces of prophets and officials, unrecognizable behind flickering shadows and diffused sunlight. The irony lay in the quiet ordinariness of her act. Simply walking, simply waiting, while her innermost trust was tested in the slow, unremarkable concealment of her purpose. The city, unmoved, held her secret in its endless, silent layers. Finally reaching her destination, the heavy door opened softly to reveal a quiet room filled with faint, nostalgic sounds. The rustle of parchment, the distant murmur of voices. Livia's hands, trembling slightly less now, delivered the scroll with a measured gesture, and in that calm moment she was able to breathe again, if only briefly. The danger had passed, or so it seemed, yet the experience left her pondering the subtle irony of her obedience. The more she tried to be unseen, the more her own quiet resolve became apparent. The city's ancient stones offered no judgment, only their unchanging, gentle patience as she navigated the aftermath, her thoughts drifting like the soft breeze through open courtyards. In this calm, a gentle sense of quiet resilience settled the understanding that even in small acts, humans carried a quiet dignity amid the endless mundane hum. Reflecting later in the softly lit courtyard, Livia regarded the distant, blurred faces of prophets and kings, their features hidden by light or shadow. Much like her own fleeting role in this story, the ordeal had tested her loyalty and courage. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, she saw that human trust is often a fragile thing, easily concealed beneath layers of routine and everyday life. She mused with a faint smile that her journey through the city's underbelly had, in some small way, uncovered the subtle irony of human existence. How easily we can slip unseen through the mundane while carrying the weight of subtle, unseen loyalties. The silent echo of her steps, the distant chink of a coin, the slow, peaceful breathing of sleeping children. These small, overlooked moments form the true texture of human stories. And as night fell softly over Rome, all that remained was the gentle, quiet acknowledgement of her simple, imperfect world. In the quiet corners of a Roman household, the day often began with the soft clatter of dishes and the gentle rustling of tunics as slaves prepared for the midday meal. Among them, the blond slaves moved with a subdued grace, their pale hair glinting faintly under the flickering oil lamps, silent witnesses to the steady rhythm of domestic life. A lavish banquet was underway in the atrium, the air filled with faint scents of baked bread and simmering wine, while shadows danced across the marble floors. It was a moment of normality, where even the most insignificant details felt rooted in a slow, unchanging world. Yet beneath the calm surface, quiet orders and distant laughter hinted at the subtle hierarchies at play, all waiting for an ordinary darkening of the light. Suddenly, the air was shredded by a flicker of orange and crackling sound, as flames burst forth, swallowing the intricate mosaic floor and licking hungrily toward the fragile ceiling. The guests paused, their conversations silenced by the rush of heat and the scent of burnt wood, while the house slaves scrambled, their faces lit by a trembling glow. Livia, standing near the hearth, felt her pulse slow below the surface of rising panic, her eyes fixed not on the chaotic blaze, but on a nearby, prized golden candelabrum. Instinct wrestled with reason, to save the ornament of wealth, or to reach for the young girl hiding behind a column. The rapid choices volleyed within her mind, tethered to the unspoken weight of her quiet responsibilities. A strange irony unfolded as the flames crept inward, casting flickering shadows that seemed almost playful on the stone walls. Yet the scene was anything but humorous. In that instant, the household's jewels of gold and craftsmanship seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the fragile human life hovering in danger. Livia's hand hesitated over the candelabrum, an object that symbolized their prosperity, while her eyes caught sight of the trembling girl, her face barely visible beneath a veil of dark hair. It was as if history itself paused, amused by the contrast between the glittering wealth and the fragile innocence. The fire's roar blurred the boundaries between material and mortal, demanding that something human would had to be prioritized. Even as the shadows grew long and uncertain, steadying herself amid the smoke and confusion, Livia moved swiftly, her fingers grasping the girl's trembling hand before adrift flames could reach her. The candelabrum, perched like a stubborn sentinel, remained untouched, its golden branches shimmering faintly in the dim light as she silently acknowledged its importance. Yet not enough to justify risk. Outside, the household members began to rally, dousing flames with wet cloths, their faces a mix of exhausted calm and mild surprise. Livia's choice seemed quietly inevitable, an act of strength, rooted in unseen moral resolve, her calm presence somehow anchoring the chaos. As the fire subdued into mere glowing embers, the household's collective breath seemed to settle, acknowledging the unspoken shift in their quiet hierarchy. Later, as the household cleaned ash from the floors and checked for signs of damage, the memory of that night lingered gently, like a faint echo of smoke on the breeze. Livia's decision, decisive yet modest, remained a silent testament to her resilience and moral quietude, earning her a soft respect from those around her. The candelabrum, once a symbol of wealth, now rested on a side table, its polished surface dulled but still visible, much like their shared understanding that life's true riches often resided in moments of quiet kindness. As the household resumed its slow, deliberate rhythm, the incident became just another story, woven into the tapestry of everyday life, ordinary and profound in its humble reflection. Each person carried the weight of that evening quietly, perhaps with a slight smile at the irony of what such a small act could reveal about strength and belongingness in a world both fragile and enduring. In the quiet corridors of the Roman household, the blonde slaves moved with a measured familiarity, their presence an unspoken element of daily life. Their roles were clear, yet understated, servants for the needs of the family, often filling the silent spaces between meals, chores, and quiet conversations. One such figure, Livia, whose fair hair caught the waning sunlight through the courtyard, had served faithfully for years, her fingers deft at spinning wool or tending the plants. The family's routine flowed around her quietly, as if the rhythm of Rome itself was sometimes paused for the small acts of service that made the household hum softly. It was in these mundane moments that life continued, unremarkable, and yet woven with human stories that lingered beneath the surface. Then came the day when tension subtly seeped into the household, stirred by a rare act of courage. Livia, feeling the weight of her years of service, found herself quietly resisting a command she had long obeyed without question. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant, but it carried a quiet defiance that rippled through the rooms she had known so well. The master and mistress exchanged glances, the hallway's usual murmur softening into a strange silence. As the household lingered in this delicate pause, some irony emerged, an unspoken recognition that her silent strength challenged expectations, not with loud confrontation, but with the simple act of standing her ground. The household, unaccustomed to such moments, paused in mutual uncertainty. By the soft glow of dusk, the irony of the situation quietly settled in like the fading light, an old world observing the beginning of change. Gaius, the master, appeared worn, perhaps amused beneath his composed exterior by Livia's quiet bravery. Without fuss or dramatic gestures, he granted her a modest freedom, a small recognition of her long-standing service. The transition was unremarkable on the surface, no grand ceremony, merely a nod in her direction and a soft word. Livia was allowed to step beyond the marble thresholds with her modest belongings, her footsteps slow and uncertain on the cool stone. The household's familiar walls shifted subtly in her absence, as if unsure how to proceed without her. The moment was gentle, almost mundane, yet it carried the weight of unseen change. Livia's departure was peaceful, her figure disappearing into the cooling evening air as she carried from the house memories woven into her skin and bones. The household lingered in a quiet transition, adjusting silently as routines shifted and new roles gently emerged. The echo of her footsteps receded, replaced by the quieter hum of life resettling itself around the new boundaries of the freed woman's world. The master and his family continued their daily rhythm, speaking less loudly, moving with less certainty, aware that something had subtly shifted. The evening settled in softly, like a slow wave lapping at the familiar shores of their comfort zone, accepting that change often arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. It was, after all, a small ripple in the vast flow of their days. Looking back, the story of Livia and the household echoes with a quiet morality, an ordinary tale of silent strength, small acts of courage, and the faint hope of a new beginning. Her modest freedom was more than a personal act. It signaled a quiet acknowledgement of her humanity amid the routines of servitude and status. As she disappeared into the distance, her shadow cast a long, gentle line on the ground, faint and fleeting, yet somehow significant. The household adapted, as households do, shifting into a slightly altered story where the mundane met human resilience. In the stillness between moments, we find a shared, unspoken understanding that even in the quietest corners of life, change is happening, slow and subtle, but real. And so, the house prepared itself for the quiet dawn of new stories, yet to be written.